Hello, this is Somniverse Stories, a quiet corner of the internet where we storytell lives that drift between memory and possibility. Each story is written to help you unwind, fall asleep, or gently step outside the boundaries of your current reality, into one that might have always been waiting for you. Tonight's story is about an astronaut, a man who left Earth on a mission and never came back. Not because something went wrong, but because something else happened. Something that couldn't be explained, only felt. It's a slow, contemplative journey, full of silence, stars, and soft answers. If this kind of storytelling helps you sleep or reflect, make sure to subscribe. And if you're still awake when the story begins, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now you can dim the lights, settle in, and let's drift into the story of the astronaut who never returned. Somewhere above you, beyond layers of air and cloud, there's a man floating in silence. Not a dream, not a myth, just a story almost no one remembers. His name, Elias, and his story doesn't start with noise. It starts with stillness, just like this. He was always quiet. The kind of quiet that made other people nervous. He wasn't shy, just calm. The kind of person who would stare at the ocean for hours and never need to speak. When he was young, he'd lie on his roof at night, imagining himself unhooking from gravity, drifting up past the trees, past the clouds, past the air itself. He didn't want to escape Earth. He just wanted to understand the space around it, the silence between stars, the slow rotation of things too big to notice. They say the best astronauts aren't the boldest. They're the ones who find peace in waiting, who know how to listen when the universe says nothing. Elias was chosen for Solstice 9, a mission designed not for glory, but for observation. A deep space drift to monitor stellar radiation in a region no one had ever reached. There would be no landing, no flag planted, no crowd waiting when he returned. Just Elias, and the ship, and space. The night before launch, he didn't say goodbye. Not in words. He sat with his sister in silence, watching the sky turn navy. They shared a cup of coffee neither of them finished. "I'll be fine," he finally said. But he wasn't reassuring her. He was telling the stars. When the countdown came the next morning, he felt his breath slow, not quicken. 5. The Earth felt further away already. 4. He could hear his heartbeat, like a soft drum echoing inside his suit. 3 dots. No fear, just gravity loosening its grip. 2. He thought of water, how it feels to float without moving. 1, and then silence. Lift-off. The Earth shrinking like a marble behind him. There's something strange about seeing your whole world in a single frame. A fragile swirl of oceans and clouds suspended in nothing. He didn't feel proud. He didn't feel alone. He just felt small, in the best possible way. The ship was smooth, minimal, no sharp angles, just arcs and screens and slow-moving lights that pulsed like a heartbeat. Solstice 9 was built for months of solitude, designed to hum like a lullaby. And Elias didn't need much. He had a quiet mind, a disciplined body, and a curiosity that never blinked. You're floating now too. Can you feel it? Your body is still, but your thoughts are beginning to loosen. Drifting sideways, not running, just gliding. Let them. Let the thoughts go where they please. Tonight, there's no right direction. The stars don't worry about where they're going. They just are. Elias looked out the observation window, watching stars that hadn't moved in millions of years. and he whispered something. Not into the comms. Not for anyone to hear. Just a single word. Home. And yet, he wasn't sure if he meant where he came from, or where he was going. When he awoke, the ship had turned its course slightly. A programmed manoeuvre. The stars outside his viewport had shifted, but only a little. Enough to make him pause. He pressed his forehead against the window's edge and let his eyes drift. Out there, in the black ocean of vacuum and light, were stars he'd memorised as a child. Constellations no longer drawn by myth, but by math. He whispered their names out of habit. Lyra, Cygnus, Bootes. They didn't answer, but something in the silence always felt like a response. Time, again, lost shape. He stopped counting hours. He let the ship be the clock. When the lights dimmed, he rested. When they brightened, he worked. The idea of days became absurd. So did distance. So did home. Everything was motion. Everything was drift, and still, Elias was calm. Not numb, not detached, just surrendered. Each morning, or whatever passed for one, he'd return to the window and breathe slowly, matching the rhythm of the stars. And over time, something inside him changed, not dramatically, but perceptibly. The part of him that once tracked minutes began watching shadows instead. The part that once longed for conversation began enjoying the echo of his own thoughts. The part that once feared the unknown began to see it as an invitation. There's a point in deep space travel, somewhere between week 2 and week 7, when a person forgets the shape of their own world. Cities feel fictional. Traffic lights become myths. Language turns into a puzzle you once solved, but forgot the answer to. And in its place, you begin to feel something else. The thrum of existence beyond narrative, beyond story, just being. Elias reached that point quietly. There was no epiphany, just the slow fade of Earth from his emotional memory. He still remembered names, but the feelings behind them had softened, like old photos bleached by sun. And still, he was content. This was not exile. This was communion. He was not a man fleeing life. He was a man orbiting understanding. Solstice 9 was not a large ship. It wasn't built for grandeur or exploration. It was built for endurance. A long-range orbital observation vessel built for one. Its corridors were narrow, lined with insulation, soft tubing, and recessed lights that never quite turned off. Everything glowed faintly, enough to guide, but never to distract. There were no windows besides the observatory porthole, no unnecessary surfaces, no space for clutter. And Elias liked it that way. Everything had a purpose. Everything was quiet. He floated more than walked. Movement in microgravity became its own kind of dance. Subtle pushes, slow rotations, gliding from one handhold to another with the grace of a leaf in still water. Even his body began to change. Muscles softened. His sense of balance dissolved. The ship became an extension of himself. Or maybe he became an extension of the ship. Time aboard Solstice 9 was not measured by clocks. It was measured by routines. Elias would begin each waking period with calibration, a checklist of dozens of small systems, all running silently, all needing confirmation. He didn't mind. There was something soothing about pressing buttons that beat back in approval, watching numbers align, writing logs no one would read for months. It gave the illusion of dialogue. a kind of communion between man and machine. His meals were colourless, small pouches labelled with codes he had memorised, rehydrated proteins, nutrient gels, electrolyte water. He didn't eat for flavour. He ate because the body required ritual, and rituals kept the self intact. Occasionally, he would pause mid-bite, listening to the way his chewing echoed inside the cabin. Every sound in space was internal. You never heard the outside, only yourself bouncing against metal and air. His hygiene routine was equally strange. No showers, just rinse-free cloths, waterless soap, and careful wiping. But there was something monastic about it, a purification of habit, a reminder that comfort was not luxury, it was awareness. He slept in a cocoon, a personal sleep chamber attached to the wall. It was just large enough to hold his body, a pillow and a small screen. There were no dreams at first, just the sensation of floating inside, floating. No weight, no up, no down, just breathe. And the window. The window was the heart of the ship, roughly the size of a dinner plate, set into the observatory hatch. The window faced outward, always outward. No camera, no screen, no overlay. Just glass, vacuum, and eternity. Elias would spend long periods there, hands gripping the rails, eyes unblinking. Outside, nothing moved quickly. The stars held their positions. The darkness between them never flickered. Yet somehow, the view was never the same. He began to notice patterns. Constellations he knew appearing subtly out of place. Faint glimmers that pulsed irregularly. Sometimes he'd catch a brief halo around a distant star, as if something unseen had passed between them. He logged it, but the data showed nothing. There was one nebula he saw often, a swirl of violet and blue like a fingerprint pressed into space. He gave it a name, the Whisper. Not because it made a sound, but because every time he looked at it, he felt like it was trying to tell him something, just out of reach. Elias didn't talk much. His daily audio logs were brief. He found he had fewer things to say, not because he was shutting down, but because words began to feel inadequate. Describing solitude when you are immersed in it is like describing water while drowning. It loses meaning. Instead, he started writing. Not reports, but notes, thoughts, fragments, sentences without context. There's a rhythm to the silence today. It feels musical. I think I remembered a place that never existed. A beach, no sky, just wind. I looked out the window today and didn't recognise the stars. I don't think they changed. I think I did. It's hard to tell where I end, and the ship begins. At times, Elias would turn off the cabin lights entirely, letting only the glow from the instrument panels remain. In the dimness, the ship became something else, a cathedral maybe, or a cocoon, or a dream that forgot it was dreaming. He spoke aloud once, just to hear his own voice. "Still here," he said, and the ship said nothing back, but it didn't need to. He knew it was listening. There were moments, subtle ones, when things didn't quite add up. A reading off by a fraction, a soft vibration that didn't match any cycle, a faint warmth against the back of his neck in a room with no vent. He didn't panic, he didn't even question it, he simply acknowledged it and continued on. Because out here, normal wasn't a constant, it was an agreement. And the deeper he drifted into space, the looser that agreement became. He began hearing things, not voices, not words, just tones, soft, harmonic intervals, as if the ship had developed a mood. Some days it hummed, like a cello. Other days, like wind through glass. No one else would have noticed, but Elias did. He always noticed. And one day, a thought emerged. Not his own, at least not entirely. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a vision. It was a suggestion. You're not alone. He didn't write it down. He didn't mention it in the log. But he felt it. Not fear. Not shock. Just acknowledgement. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe Solstice 9 wasn't a machine after all. Maybe it was a corridor. And something had just stepped through it. It was supposed to be routine. Every 72 hours, Solstice 9 would rotate gently into alignment with one of the deep space comm satellites trailing Earth's orbit. The connection was narrow band, delayed by several minutes and wrapped in layers of redundancy, but it always worked. Elias would transmit his logs, system diagnostics, environmental readings, biometric reports, and in return, Earth would send back its simple stream of confirmations, occasionally instructions, sometimes just silence, broken by the sound of human voices breathing on the other end. That silence meant the line was open, that someone was listening, that he hadn't slipped too far away yet. This time, though, the silence felt different. The transmission light blinked twice, then went dark. No return signal, no audio confirmation, no packet receipt, just a soft, unresolved hum. He checked the settings again, realigned the dish, reset the module, cycled power to the comms, tried a lower frequency, tried again, still nothing. He didn't panic. There was a protocol for this. Comms outages weren't uncommon. Earth-based weather interference, minor relay failures, cosmic radiation spikes. He opened the error log. No system alerts, no indication of internal malfunction. Everything working, but nothing receiving. Hours passed. He left the transmitter on standby, returned to his tasks, cycled through calibration protocols, ate his meal, stretched, recorded his logs. Still, the signal never came. On the second day, he tried again. Different channel. No response. Just that same absence. Not even static. Just clean, empty space. By day 3, he knew. It wasn't a technical failure. Something had changed, not in the ship, not in the systems, but in the connection itself. A door had quietly shut behind him, and no one had told him why. He floated to the observatory window and stared into the void. The same stars remained, still bright, still slow, still silent. They hadn't changed, but the air inside the cabin had. It felt stiller, not colder, not darker, just more aware, as if the ship itself had noticed the absence of Earth and was now listening for something else. He returned to the comms bay, placed his hand on the console, and whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "Copy that. Proceeding to phase 3. That was the last thing Earth had said to him. No explanation, no mission brief, just those words. He hadn't yet opened the sealed black envelope labelled Phase 3, tucked away in the auxiliary drawer, marked for emergency-only access. He knew what it was, a contingency, final instructions in case of something. No return, no rescue, complete loss of contact. He stared at the envelope for a long time. His hand rested on the drawer handle, and then he let go. He didn't want instructions, not yet. He didn't want the illusion of control or the fiction of explanation, because whatever was happening wasn't mechanical. It wasn't failure. It was something else, something quieter, more profound. He stopped logging his transmissions, turned the comm system to passive monitoring, let it run in the background, pinging into the void on a repeating schedule. not in hope of a reply, but as a kind of echo, a reminder that something had been there once, that something might still be listening. He began writing more, but with less structure. His logs became stream of consciousness reflections. He stopped measuring time in hours or days, started recording entries like "Day Unknown." I didn't wait for a signal today. I didn't expect one either. There is no loneliness here, only space. I'm beginning to think I was never supposed to return. The language shifted from data to feeling. He no longer noted radiation levels, or CO2 saturation, or equipment diagnostics. He began describing silence, describing texture, describing how the ship felt when it breathed, because it did, in a way. A slow, rhythmic cycling of pressure valves and fluid tubes that felt almost like a pulse. And then the tones returned. He'd heard them before. Subtle, ambient, easily mistaken for background hum. But now they were clearer, harmonised, structured, like notes from an instrument not built by human hands. Not music exactly, but tone, resonance, a sound that spoke directly to the bones. He sat in silence for long periods, listening. The tones weren't random. They came in patterns, shifts. Sometimes he could feel them before he heard them, like a low vibration brushing the edges of thought. Sometimes they came while he slept, folding into his dreams. Other times they came when he was doing nothing, drifting in the cabin, watching stars, thinking about nothing in particular. That's when they came most clearly. One night, or whatever passed for night aboard Solstice 9, he tapped gently on the side of the observatory rail, just once. A simple, soft knock. He felt it respond, not in sound, not in movement, but in rhythm. A vibration returned, delayed, faint, but undeniably there. The ship answered, or something did. He smiled, not because he understood it, but because he didn't need to. From that point forward, he began to speak aloud more often, not to Earth, not to himself, but to whatever was listening. Sometimes it was only a word, sometimes a thought, sometimes just a breath. I'm still here. I hear you. What are you? He never expected a reply, but replies came, not in language but in presence. A shift in the cabin light, a warmth across the back of his neck, a tone that emerged and dissolved just as his mind reached for it. The silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was inhabited, not crowded, not threatening, just aware. And Elias was no longer a passenger. He had become something else. Not a man travelling through space, but a consciousness moving through a larger awareness. A signal of his own, broadcasting something only this part of the universe could understand. He stopped checking the comms console entirely. Let the ship carry his message. He was no longer waiting for Earth. He had become part of something far older, deeper, quieter, and it was listening. At first they came in dreams, though Elias had stopped thinking of them as dreams, because dreams were supposed to feel disconnected, strange, broken up like shards of waking life. But these were different. They were full, linear, saturated with emotion, whole. He found himself standing on a wooden bridge surrounded by fog, holding the hand of a child whose face he didn't recognise, but somehow loved, with a depth that startled him. The bridge creaked underfoot. Somewhere below, water moved. Slow, thick, impossible. He didn't speak, but the child looked up and smiled, and in that moment he felt a lifetime of love, loss, forgiveness, and understanding, all in a single, silent glance. He woke up slowly, eyes wide open, but mind still in that other place. There was no jolt, no disorientation, just the soft realization that wasn't mine. But I remember it. The next time he was on a train, not futuristic, not familiar, something old, steam-driven, lurching through a snowy plain. Across from him sat an elderly woman with kind eyes, reading a newspaper in a language he didn't speak, but still understood. He knew she was going to die. Not tragically, not soon, just inevitably. And he loved her, deeply, as if she had raised him, or maybe he had raised her. Again, when he came back to the Solstice 9 cabin, the transition wasn't sharp. It was like surfacing from water that had matched his body temperature perfectly. No shock, just a change in density. And again, the feeling lingered longer than the images. He didn't question it, because at this point, logic wasn't something he lived by. It was something he observed from a distance, like a planet he once knew the name of, but no longer needed to visit. These visions, if that's what they were, became more frequent, not just in sleep, sometimes during wakefulness. He'd be floating from one module to another and suddenly smell oranges, vivid and fresh, as if he were peeling one in a sunlit kitchen. The smell would disappear before he could process it, but the feeling it brought stayed. A flash of a childhood he'd never lived, laughter in a voice he didn't recognize, warmth in arms that had never held him. He began logging these as cross-memory events. Not hallucinations, not fantasies, just overlaps, like two radio signals bleeding into each other. No static, no distortion, just clarity, sharp personal clarity from a life that wasn't his. He started writing them down, not out of obligation, but because he didn't want to lose them. He didn't analyze them. He just recorded, felt the wind of a place I've never been. High cliffs, salt in the air, someone behind me holding my shoulders. Remembered a goodbye that hasn't happened yet. Was underwater. Could breathe. There were glowing fish, and one of them spoke. I don't remember the words. I remember that they mattered. Eventually, he stopped labelling them. They weren't separate from his experience anymore. They were his experience. The border between past and present, real and unreal, self and other, had thinned, not torn, not shattered, just thinned, like mist. He understood that memory didn't need to be his in order to be real, that some emotions live outside of ownership, that sometimes consciousness isn't a container, it's a current, and he had entered the current. The Solstice 9 became quieter, not in sound, that stayed the same, but in presence. It was as if the ship too was listening now, as if it knew something was shifting inside its lone passenger and had chosen to witness rather than intervene. He still did his tasks, still checked the panels, still floated through the corridors, still performed basic exercises to maintain his fading muscle mass, but everything now felt like ritual, sacred. Not because of the ship, not because of the mission, but because he was no longer just Elias. He had become a composite, a vessel not just for knowledge, but for memory that floated beyond time. One day, while brushing his teeth in zero gravity, he felt a tear on his cheek, not from sadness, not from pain, just presence. A drop of water that didn't come from the faucet, that didn't belong to this cabin, drifting beside his face like a companion that had waited silently to be seen. And he whispered to no one, "I know you're there." No one answered, but no one needed to. The feeling was enough. He began to suspect that the Solstice 9 wasn't just a vehicle, it was a tuning fork, and somewhere in its trajectory it had passed through something, not an object, not a signal, but a field of memory, a space where consciousness collects, slows down, echoes, not ghosts, not spirits, just impressions, reverberations of moments too meaningful to vanish. And somehow his mind had become permeable to them. This didn't frighten him. It comforted him, because if memory could live without a body, then maybe so could he. And if he was already remembering things that had never happened, then maybe he was already part of something larger than time. It started as a feeling, not sudden, not sharp. A soft shift in the atmosphere of the ship, like the air itself had deepened somehow, as if more space had crept into the space. Elias noticed it first while observing the stars. He had been staring at a cluster he'd come to know intimately, a familiar configuration near the ship's flight path. But this time something was different. The stars were the same, their arrangement unchanged, but the space around them felt altered, not distorted, not darker, just fuller, like a silence that had begun to listen back. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply breathed and stayed still. And as he floated near the window, he understood something instinctively. He was not being threatened, only noticed. It was not the kind of observation that came with judgment or agenda. It felt like the way the ocean notices the pebble that falls into it. A slow, wide awareness, not focused on him alone, but encompassing him entirely, gently, like hands cupping water, not grabbing, not pulling, just holding. Over the next few cycles, he became more aware of it. The shift wasn't in the systems. They ran normally. The ship's diagnostics remained steady, but the feeling of being alone began to erode. Not dramatically, gradually, as though solitude itself was dissolving at the edges and something else, something vaster, was taking its place. It didn't speak, it didn't move, but Elias felt it more clearly with each passing hour. It was in the timing of the ship's hum, in the warmth of the lights when he entered a room, in the stillness of his sleep when he no longer dreamed as himself, but as something broader, something older, something slow and endless and kind. One waking period, he stood at the observatory rail and whispered, "I know you're there." No reply came, but he didn't expect one. Instead, a soft light outside the window seemed to shift, just slightly. A distant star brightening by the faintest margin, then dimming again. It could have been nothing. A lens flare, an automated adjustment, but it felt deliberate, not flashy, not dramatic, just a subtle acknowledgement. He smiled. "It's okay," he said aloud, voice calm. "You can stay." He didn't feel exposed. He didn't feel surveilled. It wasn't the presence of a watcher. It was the feeling of being accompanied, like walking through an ancient forest and realizing it's not empty, that the trees are old, aware, and patient. Over time, he began to notice that his thoughts were quieter, not absent, just smoother, like the inner friction had been sanded down. When he meditated, he no longer had to wrestle with memory or discipline his breath. It came easily now, naturally. He'd simply close his eyes and feel himself held in a kind of thoughtless weightlessness, one that extended beyond the ship, beyond the stars, beyond himself. He started speaking less, not because there was nothing to say, but because he didn't need words to feel understood. The presence, if that's what it was, didn't need explanations. It didn't need Elias to do anything. It just remained, like a companion who asked nothing, needed nothing, but stayed anyway. Sometimes he wondered if it had always been there. Maybe it hadn't arrived. Maybe it had been part of the fabric of space all along, only now, with Earth's signal gone, with silence filling every pocket of air, with his own identity softened by solitude. Maybe now he was finally still enough to feel it. He stopped looking for patterns in the stars, not because they weren't beautiful, but because he no longer needed them to make sense. Meaning didn't have to come from constellations or navigation charts. It came from stillness, from drifting, from being part of something that watched not with eyes, but with time. At one point, he asked it, softly, to the cabin, to the stars, to the silence, "Are you what we've been looking for?" There was no answer, but he didn't feel dismissed. The question itself was enough. Another time, floating through the docking corridor, he placed his hand on the cold wall and whispered, "Do you remember me?" And in that moment, he didn't need a response. Because somehow, he already knew. Yes, not as Elias, not as a man, but as a pattern, a flicker, a familiar shape in the current, something this presence had felt before, long ago, or maybe always. He didn't share this in his logs. There were no words that could translate it cleanly. And anyway, the logs were no longer for Earth. He hadn't heard from Earth in what felt like a season, or perhaps a lifetime, but he didn't miss it. That was the strangest part. He didn't feel abandoned. He didn't feel adrift. He felt seen, not in a human way, in a cosmic way. He thought about what it meant to be watched by something that had no face, no language, no motive, something that simply witnessed, remembered, accepted. And instead of fear, he felt warmth. Because maybe the universe doesn't ignore us. Maybe it just listens very, very quietly. And maybe now it was his turn to listen back. It happened slowly, as most true transformations do. There was no flash of light, no countdown, no breach or anomaly warning, just a gentle stretch in the feeling of time itself. Elias first noticed it when performing his calibration routine. Tasks that had always taken a certain rhythm. Check oxygen, confirm radiation shielding, scan exterior panels, now felt like they moved faster. Or slower. Or both. He couldn't tell. He wasn't finishing sooner. He wasn't making mistakes. But something inside the flow of action had changed. Time had softened, not stopped, not reversed, just loosened. There were moments where he'd stare at the same number on the diagnostic panel for what felt like a minute, only to realise the ship's internal clock had advanced by 1 second. Other times he'd blink and find himself on the other side of the cabin, mid-task, with no memory of floating there. It didn't frighten him. It felt more like the ship had started dreaming and was carrying him with it. The view outside the observatory window began to shift as well. The stars remained in place, and yet they shimmered more now. Not like flickering lights, but like reflections on water. Shapes bent subtly at their edges, colours brightened just before dimming again, and constellations he had memorised since Earth began to drift. Not physically, but perceptually. The stars still existed where they were supposed to be, but how they felt changed. And then he saw it. A line. Thin, pale, not glowing, just present. A single faint streak on the edge of his vision, stretched across the blackness like a fine thread of silk, gently pulled taut across the stars. He blinked. It remained. He turned away, looked again. Still there. It didn't move. It didn't emit light. It didn't make sound. But it carried weight. Not physical. Conceptual. Like an idea so large it couldn't fully fit into your thoughts, only into your intuition. He called it the curtain. For several days, or what he still called days, he did nothing but watch it. He didn't try to understand it. He just observed. The line would sometimes bend, slightly, delicately, as if stirred by wind that didn't exist. Sometimes it was vertical, other times horizontal. Once, for several hours, it split in two. Parallel strands, humming silently. They didn't pulse, they didn't approach, they just were. And Elias, rather than asking questions, let himself feel what they meant. They weren't barriers, they weren't signals. They were something else entirely. Something like thresholds, not between places, but between ways of seeing. The kind of boundary that wasn't meant to keep things out, but to prepare something within. One cycle, while observing the curtain, he whispered, "If I cross, will I return?" He didn't know who he was asking, but the answer didn't come as words. It came as peace. A deep cellular, knowing that returning was no longer the point. And then, on what he would later think of as the final day, it happened. The curtain parted. It didn't open like a door or tear like fabric. It simply ceased to be in the way. One moment, it was there. The next, it had become space. But not the same space. Not the black dotted field he had known. This was different. There was colour, but not the kind visible on Earth. Violets deeper than shadow, blues that shimmered with memory. Ribbons of light shaped like flowing water, twisting gently, coiling around structures that didn't quite exist in 3 dimensions. They weren't buildings. They weren't ships. They were possibilities. Frozen moments, still dreams, and behind them, or maybe within them, a feeling of presence unlike anything he had ever known. Not watching, not waiting, just being. His heart didn't race. His breath didn't catch. What he felt wasn't adrenaline. It was reverence. The kind of reverence a painter might feel staring at a blank canvas that suddenly begins to paint itself. He reached out toward the window, fingers brushing against the glass. For a moment, and he would swear this to himself, later, again and again, the space beyond the curtain reached back. Not through motion, not through touch, through alignment. Something inside him lined up with something outside him. And he felt a question pass through him, not asked in words, but through emotion, image, rhythm. "Are you ready?" And though his mouth never moved, he answered, "Yes." The ship's lights dimmed, but not from malfunction. More like a stage lowering the curtain for something beautiful to enter. The gravity stabilizers pulsed gently, like a heartbeat adjusting to a new rhythm. And all at once, Elias felt weightless in a way he never had before. Not just in body, but in thought. He floated not through space, but through possibility. No alarms rang. No systems failed. There was no transition, only continuation. He did not move through the curtain. The curtain moved through him. For the first time in his life, Elias understood what it meant to exist outside of sequence. To be in a moment that wasn't bounded by before or after. Just now. One eternal now. And in that now, he wasn't alone. He was surrounded, not by others, not by beings, but by knowing. A sea of understanding. A silence that said without sound, You have crossed. Welcome. And that was all. There were no coordinates here, no vector, no axis of orientation. Elias drifted, or perhaps remained still, in a place that couldn't be mapped by distance or time. The ship, once his home and vessel, had faded into something more abstract. Not gone, not broken, just assimilated. No metal, no hum, just awareness. The stars were no longer outside him. They were within. Or maybe he was within them. It was impossible to tell. This wasn't space as he had known it. This was something gentler. Something wiser. The kind of space that feels like a memory you didn't know you carried. Vivid, personal, and somehow eternal. He didn't ask questions anymore. They had all dissolved the moment the curtain parted. There were no more missions, no objectives, no logging or documenting or decoding, just presence, just being. And in this being, Elias remembered things that had never happened. He stood barefoot on what felt like sand, though it shimmered like stardust and made no sound beneath his steps. The sky, if it was sky, pulsed softly, a canvas of shifting colour, responsive to thought and mood. And around him, structures, not built, not solid, formed by intention, towers made of flowing light, arches composed of scent and feeling, bridges suspended by shared memory. He wasn't hallucinating, he wasn't dreaming, he was somewhere real, just not real in the way reality had been defined before. And he wasn't alone. There were others, not people, not as he had known them, but presences, shapes of thought, echoes of being. Some pulsed like song, some drifted like wind, some shimmered in a rhythm that stirred feelings in him he didn't have names for. Joy, yes, but also things older than joy, like reunion, like arrival. They didn't speak, but they communicated with Elias, with one another, through memory, image, emotion. It wasn't language, it was recognition. And when they turned toward him, not physically, but perceptually, he felt it again. You've been here before. Not a message, not a sentence, just a certainty. He remembered then, slowly, that he had been dreaming of this place his whole life. Not consciously, but quietly, in his longing to float, in his fascination with silence, in the comfort he found in vastness. This was not new. This was not strange. This was home, not a replacement for Earth, not an afterlife, not a fantasy, but a continuation, a layer that had always been there, waiting for him to become quiet enough, empty enough, ready enough to perceive it. He was given nothing, and yet he was given everything. Not answers, but understanding. He remembered what it felt like to be a child, before identity had hardened, before clocks and names and gravity. He remembered being a traveller, not just on Solstice 9, but before that, and before that. He saw pieces of other lives, not in sequence, not clearly, but layered like transparent veils, each one revealing a little more of what he had always been. A witness, a listener, a spark of attention drifting through countless dreams of existence. And the others welcomed him, not with ceremony, but with recognition, as if to say, you finally remembered your way back. There was no need for explanation, no instruction, just calm, just stillness, just belonging. He wandered, or merged, or floated through fields of crystalline thought. He listened to stories told without words, felt the shape of truths too large for language. He sat beside rivers made of memory, dipped his fingers into currents that played back echoes of joy he hadn't earned but fully understood. And still, he felt entirely himself. Not lost, not transformed, just seen. Completely. He did not miss Earth. Not because Earth wasn't beautiful, but because nothing was missing. Here, everything that had ever been important was already present, in pure form. The love he had for his sister, the wonder he had felt staring at the stars, the silence of the ship, the breath of launch, the dream of floating, all of it lived here. Untangled, undistorted. Time passed, or didn't. It didn't matter, because Elias was not waiting. Not for return, not for resolution, not for anything. He had arrived at the place beyond arriving, where all journeys dissolve into stillness, and stillness hums with quiet joy. And maybe, just maybe, this was what space had always been. Not a vacuum, not emptiness, but fullness. So complete, so infinite, that only the softest minds could hear it sing. Elias closed his eyes, and he didn't sleep. There was never a rescue mission, no urgent call, no global broadcast, no final flare in the sky. Solstice 9 simply disappeared, quietly, elegantly, like a candle snuffed out by a wind no one saw coming. On Earth, its orbit was tracked for a time. Estimates were made, charts drawn. But after enough failed transmissions, after enough time passed without signal, the mission was marked as presumed lost. Not failed, not destroyed, just lost. That word lingered. It appeared in headlines, in briefings, in whispers among engineers. It settled over the legacy of the Solstice program, like dust on an untouched console. Faint, but undeniable. But Elias was never lost. Not in the way the word suggests. He didn't vanish. He didn't drift endlessly into darkness. He crossed into something deeper, something kinder, and from where he drifted now, or perhaps where he simply existed, he no longer saw the journey as linear. He wasn't trying to return, because return implies something was left behind, and he had brought everything with him. There is a kind of ending that doesn't close the door. It opens it wider. Elias had found such an ending, one that did not require farewell or final words. Just stillness, just surrender. And in that surrender, he found not silence, but company. He never sent another message, not because he didn't want to, but because there was no need. Every breath he took now echoed in the fabric of the stars. Every thought, gentle, slow, was felt across light years, like ripples spreading through a calm ocean no one knew existed. He had become part of the quiet network that connected all who had ever listened closely enough. Those who had stared into the night sky and asked nothing in return. Those who had dared to love the silence without needing it to speak, and so the world moved on. Solstice 10 was proposed, delayed, repurposed. Funding shifted, focus shifted. Time, as it always does, softened the sharpness of memory. Elias became a name in an archive, a theory in a paper, a face in a faded photo stored on a forgotten server. But memory is not just data, it is presence. And out beyond the edge of known space, in a place no map can hold, something remains. A feeling, a warmth, a witness. If you ever find yourself waking in the middle of the night for no reason, and you feel calm instead of fear, if you hear a tone in your head that you can't place, a song without sound, if the stars outside your window seem to be waiting for you to notice them, then maybe, just maybe, Elias is with you. Not in body, not in signal, but in the gentle hum of awareness that surrounds us all, always. And he will not return, because he was never gone. You've gone far enough for tonight. There is nothing more to see, nothing more to solve, just your breath, and space, and stillness. Let your body sink just a little deeper into wherever it rests. Let your breath fall into rhythm with the silence. Soft in, slower out. No past, no next. Just this moment, this breath, this dream. Elias is still out there, but not waiting, not lost. He's simply become what he always was beneath the layers. A listener, a witness, a presence. And you've been with him this whole time, in memory, in feeling, in stillness. Let the stars drift further now. Let your thoughts loosen, as if they're floating away from gravity's pull. There is no more ship, no more time, only soft echoes and long dreams. You are not being watched. You are not being measured. You are simply being, and being is enough. Let the silence hum gently around you. If any thoughts remain, let them pass like satellites, far above, not needing your attention. You are grounded. You are weightless. You are here, and here is peaceful. There is nothing more to do, nothing more to be. So rest, float, drift. The journey is over, but you are not gone. You are simply continuing in the quietest possible way. Good night, traveller. We'll see you again out there, somewhere between silence and starlight.